Hello, I'm Neil Hamilton, a professor of law and director of the Agricultural Law Center at Drake University in Des Moines. I want to welcome you to another installment in the series Law for Landowners, 10 Things You Should Know. Today our subject is 10 things you should know about how environmental law applies to land ownership. The first question to ask about environmental law is to think about what the resource or the activity is that's involved. Does it involve something like water quality, wildlife habitat, soil conservation, or does it involve some type of conduct like the potential need to apply for a license to build a confinement feeding operation? The law will provide different sets of rules and regulations depending on what type of resource or what type of activity or conduct is involved. The second question to consider is, what does the environmental law do in terms of requiring some type of conduct or refraining from a particular type of activity? The point is, most laws involve some type of action or duty that's imposed on landowners or responsible parties. So for example, does the law require you to get a license or a permit, for example, to be an applicator of restricted use pesticides? Or instead, does the law impose a restriction on certain types of conduct, for example, to prevent you from draining a wetland? The third issue to consider concerns who it is that's responsible for administering or enforcing the law. Is it a federal issue that involves the Environmental Protection Agency? Is it a state law question that involves the Department of Natural Resources, for example? Or in some situations, it may be even a local question. This answer will help identify who it is that you need to visit with to find out more about what the law may require of you as a landowner. The fourth issue concerns what are the risks you face for failing to comply with the law or for being found in violation. Most environmental laws have some form of sanction or penalty attached to them for violating it. This may be a monetary penalty. Some environmental laws include criminal fines. Other programs may, for example, leave you ineligible for certain farm program benefits. Understanding what's at risk also helps you understand how significant complying with the law may be in your situation. Under some environmental laws, they may even require you to take action to try to undo the damage that was done. For example, in Iowa, if you illegally straighten a stream, you might be required to go ahead and try to restore the stream to its natural condition. A fifth point to understand about environmental law is to think about who is it that's interested in seeing the law enforced. In most situations, we think about the enforcement being a function of a governmental agency. Many environmental laws include citizen suit provisions, which allow private individuals and third parties who aren't governmental agencies to bring actions to enforce the environmental law. For example, the lawsuit in Iowa against several drainage districts concerning water quality violations is brought by the Des Moines Water Works, and it's an example of a citizen suit under the Federal Clean Water Act. A sixth issue to consider when it relates to environmental law is whether there may be public assistance available to you as a landowner to help you meet the legal obligations, particularly if it requires you to take some conduct or to do something on your property. For example, many landowners are familiar with the cost sharing that's available from USDA and the state relating to soil conservation, and similar programs relate to water quality to try to provide landowners with the assistance needed to protect the environmental resource and to protect the public interest in those resources. A seventh idea to remember about environmental law is that the law oftentimes just sets the minimum in terms of what we would expect landowners and members of the public to do. You as a landowner can always go further than that if you want to. Just because there may be no law that says you can't plow up a hillside or cut down a timber doesn't mean that you have to. The issue as to how to meet stewardship and to protect the environment is very much a decision that's a personal one to individual landowners. Environmental law may provide guidance, but it's not really a substitute for a personal idea of stewardship. An eighth point to remember about environmental law is that your possible environmental duties or responsibilities might not just arise from a statute, but they might arise from other agreements or legal contracts that you've entered into. For example, farm leases generally include environmental provisions that establish duties on the part of the tenant. Similarly, if you're participating in a USDA program, you've signed a contract to be eligible for those benefits. And those contracts and rules may put certain restrictions or requirements on your conduct that are different than what some other environmental law may provide. A ninth point to recognize about the possible application of environmental law is that you may face liability as a landowner even when it wasn't your conduct that was involved. As a landowner, you're responsible for other things that may happen on your property and other actors who may have been the ones that violated the law. So, for example, as a landowner, if you're renting land to a tenant, you need to be concerned about whether or not the tenant has done something that might expose you to potential liability. Or, for example, if you're having manure spread on your property or chemicals or fertilizer applied, there's the possibility, if there was an environmental problem, let's say a spill into a river or stream, that you as the landowner could also be responsible because you're the one who contracted for the activity. This is why you need to be aware of what others are doing on your land and to be sure that they follow the law too. A tenth and final point to consider about how the environmental laws in the state may apply to you as a landowner is to recognize that there are other organizations who are out there who may be able to help you. Most of the farm and commodity organizations in the state have staff people who specialize in environmental law and whose job is to help farmers and landowners comply with the law. And there are private organizations like the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation who are very interested in working with landowners to protect natural resources and to comply with environmental law. So you're not out there alone. There are other places that you can get information. There are other organizations and groups that may be able to render assistance if you need it.